How to lead a software implementation discovery meeting. Introduction. Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to practice something that is very important for software consultants, business analysts, project managers, and implementation specialists. How to lead a software implementation discovery meeting. A discovery meeting is one of the first important conversations you have with a customer. The goal is not simply to ask questions. The goal is to understand how the customer works today, what problems they have, what they need to improve, and what they expect from the new software. A good discovery meeting can save a project many hours later. Why? Because when you understand the customer's business before designing the solution, you are much less likely to make the wrong assumptions. During this 1-hour practice, we will go through a realistic discovery meeting. I will show you how to open the meeting, introduce yourself, ask questions, clarify requirements, discuss problems, handle unclear answers, discuss priorities, and close the meeting. As you listen, pay attention to the phrases. These are phrases you can use in real meetings. Let's begin. Section 1. Opening the meeting. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's meeting. My name is Christina, and I will be leading today's discovery session. Before we begin, I would like to explain what we are going to accomplish today. The main purpose of this meeting is to understand your current business processes. We want to learn how your team works today, what challenges you are experiencing, and what you would like the new system to improve. I also want to make sure we understand your expectations correctly. This is important because we don't want to jump into a solution before we fully understand the problem. So, during the meeting, I will ask several questions about your current process. Please feel free to provide examples. If something is unclear, we can stop and discuss it. And if there is a topic that requires more research, we can document it and follow up later. Before we get started, is there anything specific you would like us to cover today? That's a very useful question. Instead of assuming what the customer wants, you give them an opportunity to tell you what is important to them. You can also say, is there anything you would like to add to today's agenda? Or, are there any specific concerns you would like us to address? These simple questions can help you discover important information before the meeting even begins. Section 2. Understanding the current process. Now that we have opened the meeting, let's start with the current process. One of the most important rules in discovery meetings is this. Understand the current process before discussing the future solution. A good question is, could you walk me through your current process? Notice that we are not asking, how should the process work? We are asking, how does it work today? That difference is very important. The customer may have a process that is not documented. They may have workarounds. They may use spreadsheets. They may manually enter information into multiple systems. They may also have steps that only one employee understands. So let the customer explain the process in their own words. You can follow up with questions such as, what happens next? Who is responsible for that step? How often does this happen? What information do you need at this point? Where does that information come from? How do you know that the process is complete? These questions help you build a picture of the current process. Another useful phrase is, let me make sure I understand the process correctly. Then explain what you heard. For example, so if I understand correctly, the sales team enters the order, then the warehouse reviews the order, and finally accounting creates the invoice. Is that correct? This is called confirmation. You're not simply listening. You are checking that your understanding matches the customer's reality. Section 3. Asking better questions. The quality of your discovery meeting depends heavily on the quality of your questions. Instead of asking only yes or no questions, try to ask open questions. For example, how do you currently manage this process? What challenges do you have with the current process? What happens when something goes wrong? How does your team handle exceptions? Who needs to approve this? What information do managers need? These questions encourage the customer to explain. Let's compare two questions. Question 1. Do you use Excel? The customer might answer, yes, and the conversation stops. Instead, ask, how do you use Excel in this process? Now, the customer has to explain. They may tell you that they use Excel to track inventory, calculate prices, create reports, or manage approvals. That answer gives you much more information. Another important technique is asking why. For example, why is this step manual? Why does this approval require 2 people? Why do you need this report? Why is this information entered twice? But be careful with your tone. You don't want why to sound like you're challenging the customer. You can make it softer. For example, could you help me understand why this step is handled manually? That sounds much more professional. The goal is not to question the customer. The goal is to understand the business reason behind the process. Section 4. Clarifying requirements. One of the most important skills in a discovery meeting is clarification. Customers often describe what they want using general language. For example, we need better reporting. That's not yet a requirement. You need to understand what better reporting means. You can ask, what information would you like to see in the report? Who will use the report? How often do you need the report? What decisions will you make using this information? What is missing from your current report? These questions turn a general request into something more specific. Let's look at another example. The customer says, we need the system to be faster. Instead of accepting that statement, ask, which part of the process feels slow? When does the delay usually happen? How long does the process take today? What would an acceptable processing time be? Now we are moving from a general complaint to a measurable requirement. Another useful phrase is, when you say automated, what exactly would you like the system to do automatically? This is very powerful. Words like automatic, easy, fast, flexible, and user-friendly can mean different things to different people. Your job is to turn those words into clear requirements. A good consultant does not simply collect requirements. A good consultant makes requirements clear. Section 5. Handling unclear answers. Sometimes the customer gives you an answer that is difficult to understand. This is normal. You should never pretend that you understand something when you don't. Instead, ask for clarification. Here are some useful phrases. Could you explain that in a little more detail? Could you give me an example? When you say X, what exactly do you mean? Could you walk me through an example? Let me make sure I understand what you mean. These phrases are simple, but they are extremely useful. Let's say the customer says, we need the system to handle special orders. Don't immediately assume you know what a special order is. Ask, could you give me an example of a special order? The customer might explain that a special order is an order that requires a different price, special packaging, or approval from a manager. Now you understand what they mean. Another useful technique is repetition. You can say, so, what I'm hearing is that the main issue is not the order itself, but the additional approval required. Is that correct? This gives the customer a chance to correct you. And remember, asking a question does not make you look inexperienced. In a discovery meeting, asking the right question shows that you are paying attention. It is much better to ask one extra question than to build a solution based on a wrong assumption. Section 6. Identifying business pain points. Now, let's talk about pain points. A pain point is a problem that makes the current process difficult, expensive, slow, or risky. You want to understand not only what the customer does, but also what causes problems. Useful questions include, what is the biggest challenge with the current process? Where do you experience the most delays? Where do errors usually occur? Which part of the process requires the most manual work? What causes the most frustration for your team? How often does this problem occur? These questions help you find the real business problems. But there is another important question. What is the impact of this problem? For example, the customer says, we have to enter the same information twice. Don't stop there. Ask, how much time does that take? How often does it happen? Does this create errors? Who is affected by this? Now you can understand the business impact. Maybe the customer spends 10 hours every week correcting duplicate information. That is much more important than simply saying. The customer wants automation. The business problem is the time and errors caused by duplicate data entry. When you understand the pain point, you can later connect the proposed solution to a real business benefit. Section 7. Discussing priorities. Not every requirement has the same level of importance. This is something you need to understand early in the project. You can ask, which of these requirements is the highest priority? What is most important for your team? If we could solve only one of these problems first, which one would you choose? What would have the biggest impact on the business? These questions help identify priorities. Let's say the customer gives you 10 requirements. They may say everything is critical. This is common. In that situation, you can ask, if we had to prioritize these requirements, how would you rank them? Or, Which requirement is essential for the first phase? You can also separate requirements into categories. For example, must have, should have, nice to have. This creates a simple framework for discussion. You can say, let's separate the requirements into must have, should have, and nice to have items. This will help us define the scope. This is especially useful when the project has limited time or budget. A discovery meeting is not only about collecting everything the customer wants. It is also about understanding what matters most. Section 8. Understanding users and roles. Another important part of discovery is understanding who will use the system. Different users often have different needs. You can ask, who is involved in this process? Who performs this step? Who approves it? Who needs to review the information? Who is responsible for the final decision? You also want to understand how different departments interact. For example, how does the sales team communicate with the warehouse? How does purchasing know when inventory needs to be replenished? How does accounting receive the information? This helps you understand the complete process. Don't focus only on one department. A process often crosses multiple departments. For example, a sales order may involve sales, inventory, purchasing, shipping, and accounting. If you only interview the sales team, you may miss important requirements from the other departments. Another useful question is, are there any users who have special requirements? For example, managers may need dashboards. Warehouse employees may need simple screens. Accountants may need detailed financial information. Understanding the user roles helps you design a solution that works for the people who will actually use it. Section 9. Discussing exceptions. One of the biggest mistakes in software implementation is focusing only on the normal process. The normal process is usually easy. The difficult part is the exception. So ask, what happens when something goes wrong? What happens if the customer changes the order? What happens if there is not enough inventory? What happens if an approval is rejected? What happens if the price is incorrect? What happens if the information is missing? These questions can reveal important requirements. Let's use a simple example. The normal process is, customer places an order. Sales enters the order. Warehouse ships it. Invoice is created. That sounds simple. But what happens if the warehouse does not have enough inventory? Does the order remain open? Does the salesperson receive an alert? Does purchasing create a purchase order? Does the customer receive a partial shipment? This is where the real complexity often appears. So remember this phrase. Let's talk about the exceptions. You can also say, are there any situations where the process works differently? This question can uncover many hidden requirements. Section 10. Confirming what you heard. After discussing several requirements, stop and summarize. This is one of the best habits you could develop as a consultant. You can say, let me summarize what we have discussed so far. Then explain the main points. For example, first, the sales team currently enters the order manually. Second, the same information is entered again by the warehouse. Third, this creates duplicate work and sometimes causes errors. And finally, the customer would like to automate this process. Then ask, is that an accurate summary? This is important because customers may hear something different from what you heard. Another useful phrase is, have I missed anything? Or, is there anything you would like to add? This gives the customer an opportunity to correct or complete the information. You can also confirm individual requirements. So the system should require manager approval when the discount exceeds 10%. Is that correct? The customer says, yes. Now you have a clear requirement. Confirmation reduces misunderstandings. It also creates a record of what both sides agreed was discussed. When you summarize, don't repeat every detail. Focus on the important points. The process, the problem, the requirement, the priority, the expected result. Section 11. Handling disagreements. Sometimes people in the meeting disagree. This is normal. For example, the sales manager may want one process while accounting wants another. Your job is not to immediately choose a side. Your job is to understand the reason behind each position. You can say, I understand both perspectives. Let's look at the business need behind each requirement. Or, let's take a step back and understand why each department needs this. You can also ask, what problem are we trying to solve? This question can bring the discussion back to the main goal. Let's say sales wants fewer approval steps because they want to move faster. Accounting wants more approvals because they want better control. Instead of asking, which process do you want? Ask, how can we balance speed with the required financial controls? This changes the conversation. You're no longer discussing preferences. You're discussing business objectives. Another useful phrase is, I think we may have two different requirements here. Let's document both and evaluate the impact. This prevents the meeting from becoming an argument. Remember, a discovery meeting should create understanding, not conflict. Section 12. When the customer requests something custom. Customers sometimes request a feature that may require customization. You should avoid saying, yes, we can do that, before you understand the requirement. Instead, ask questions. What exactly would you like the system to do? What is the business reason for this requirement? How often would this process be used? Who would use it? What happens today? Would a standard process meet the requirement? This is important because sometimes the customer asks for customization when an existing feature can solve the problem. You can say, before we consider customization, I would like to understand whether we can meet the requirement using the standard functionality. That is a very professional statement. You can also say, let's document the requirement first. Then we can evaluate the available options. This keeps the discussion open. There may be several solutions. The standard system may solve it. A configuration change may solve it. A workflow may solve it. An integration may solve it. Or customization may be required. The discovery meeting is not always the place to make the final technical decision. The important thing is to clearly understand the requirement first. Section 13. Discussing reporting and data. Reporting is another area where customers often give general requirements. They may say, we need better reports. Again, ask for details. What information do you need? Who will use the report? How often will they use it? What filters do you need? What information do you currently have? What information is missing? What decisions will this report support? You can also ask, where does the data come from today? Is the information entered manually? Do you combine information from multiple systems? These questions are important because reporting problems are often data problems. If the data is incomplete or inconsistent, creating a new report may not solve the real issue. You may discover that users enter information differently. For example, one department may use one customer code while another uses a different code. That can make reporting difficult. So don't just ask, what report do you want? Ask, what decision are you trying to make with this report? That question can lead to a much better solution. Section 14. Discussing integrations. Many software projects involve integrations with other systems. So ask, what other systems are involved in this process? Where does the information come from? Where does the information go? How often does the information need to be transferred? Is the process automatic or manual? What happens if the integration fails? That last question is very important. For example, if an external system sends an order every hour, what happens if the connection fails? Does someone receive an alert? Is the information sent again automatically? Does someone need to enter it manually? These are important requirements. You should also understand ownership. Who is responsible for the external system? Who supports the integration? Who should be contacted when there is an issue? A good discovery process looks at the entire flow of information. Don't only look at what happens inside the new system. Understand where the data comes from and where it goes afterward. Section 15. Discussing success. One question that is often forgotten is, how will we know that the project is successful? This is a very important question. Ask, what would success look like for you? What would you like to improve after implementation? How would you measure the improvement? What problems should no longer exist after go live? For example, the customer may say, we want fewer manual steps. Good. Ask, how many manual steps do you have today? What would you like the number to be after implementation? Now the goal is measurable. Another example, we want fewer errors. Ask, how many errors are you seeing today? What would be an acceptable error rate? These questions help define success. A project should not only be considered successful because the software went live. The real question is whether the software helped the business achieve its goals. That is why success criteria should be discussed early. Section 16. Handling a requirement you cannot answer. Sometimes the customer will ask you a technical question and you won't have the answer immediately. Don't guess. Instead, say, "That's a good question. I would like to verify that before giving you an answer." Or, "I don't want to give you incorrect information. Let me confirm that and follow up with you." Another option is, "Let's document that as an open item and come back to it." This is professional. You don't need to know every answer during the discovery meeting. Your responsibility is to make sure the question is captured and assigned. You can say, "I'll document this as an open item." Then identify what needs to be answered, who will research it, when the answer is needed. This is much better than making an assumption. A strong consultant knows when to say, "We need to verify that." That protects the project from incorrect decisions. Section 17. Documenting requirements. During discovery, documentation is critical. Don't depend only on your memory. For every important requirement, try to capture what the customer needs, why they need it, who needs it, when it happens, what the expected result is. You can summarize a requirement like this. The sales team needs the system to automatically notify the manager when a discount exceeds 10%. That's much better than writing discount approval. The first statement tells you who, what, when, and the expected behavior. You should also document open questions. For example, customer to confirm whether approval is required for all customers or only specific customer groups. This makes follow-up easier. At the end of the meeting, review the open items. You can say, "Before we close, let's review the items that require follow-up." Then list them. This helps everyone understand what happens next. Section 18. Closing the discovery meeting. As you approach the end of the meeting, summarize the key points. You can say, "Let me summarize what we have covered today." Then explain, "We reviewed the current process. We identified the main pain points. We discussed the key requirements. We identified the highest priorities. And we documented several open questions." Then explain the next steps. From here, we will document the requirements and review the proposed approach. We will also follow up on the open questions. After that, we can schedule the next session. Then ask, "Does that sound good?" You can also ask, "Is there anything important that we haven't discussed?" This is an excellent final question. Sometimes the most important information comes at the very end. You can also say, "Thank you everyone for your time today. We appreciate the information you provided." This discussion gives us a much better understanding of your business process. Once we complete our review, we will follow up with the next steps. A professional closing should be clear and short. Everyone should leave the meeting knowing what was discussed, what was agreed, what remains open, and what happens next. Section 19. Complete discovery meeting phrase review. Let's quickly review some of the most useful phrases from this session. To open the meeting, "Thank you for joining today's meeting." The purpose of today's meeting is to understand your current process. To understand the current process. Could you walk me through your current process? What happens next? Who is responsible for that step? To clarify, could you give me an example? When you say that, what exactly do you mean? Let me make sure I understand. To identify problems. What is the biggest challenge with the current process? Where do you experience the most delays? What is the impact of this problem? To understand priorities. Which requirement is the highest priority? What would have the biggest impact on the business? To handle uncertainty. I would like to verify that before giving you an answer. Let's document that as an open item. To summarize. Let me summarize what we have discussed. Is that an accurate summary? Have I missed anything? And finally, to close. Let's review the next steps. Is there anything important that we haven't discussed? Thank you for your time today. These phrases are simple, but they are very useful in real professional meetings. Final section. Leading a good software implementation discovery meeting is not about asking as many questions as possible. It is about asking the right questions. You need to understand the current process. You need to identify the business problems. You need to clarify the requirements. You need to understand priorities. You need to identify exceptions. and you need to confirm that everyone has the same understanding. The most important skill is listening. Don't rush to propose a solution. First, understand the problem, then understand the business reason, then evaluate the possible solutions, and finally, confirm the expected result. If you practice these phrases regularly, you will become more comfortable leading professional meetings in English. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.